And now a new image has appeared of the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Imagine if that was the full stop. That wouldn't be a very interesting story, would it? But this is at a fancy dress party with a blacked-up face. The photograph was taken, there it is, 20 years ago at an Arabian Nights party and has been taken up by Trudeau critics, there's quite a few of them, as an example of his hypocrisy. He's carved out a reputation as a, deeply politically correct leader, but the appearance 2 years ago of photographs showing him in blackface have been, have they been damaging? And indeed, should they be? Andrew Doyle is here to reflect on the ethics of this. 20 years ago, he was 29 when these photos were taken, and wearing blackface, I suppose, 20 years ago was less of an obvious morally criminal offence than it's become.
Well, clearly, because he did it so much and and kept doing it, so he obviously wasn't getting much flack for it. However, that said, I can't remember a time in my lifetime when it was ever considered acceptable. It does seem surprisingly recent. But what is particularly odd about this is when he was asked about... some of these photos came to light in 2019, actually. There were photographs from 3 different events in which he was dressed in this way. At the time, he said he couldn't be sure. He said he'd lost count on how many occasions he'd done this. So he must have done this quite a lot. It sounds like it was his party trick, that kind of thing. So there's probably a lot more photos out there, and every now and then this will come up to bite him. But the thing is, it doesn't seem to actually have much of an impact. You know, when this happens to some people, their careers are utterly destroyed, there's no possibility of coming back. Well, he won an election after the original images came out, so it's obviously not going to affect him all that much.
Well, he made a very full apology, I seem to remember, at the time, so that's part of it.
Well, also, I think it's because of his politics. You know, he is part of the identitarian left. He's very much considered almost the epitome of this. You know, in the way that even his socks, sometimes he wears political socks, like gay pride socks, this kind of thing.
I never put those two words together before.
No, it's not the best way to spread that message, really. But he's very much perceived as being a kind of icon of the social justice movement, and therefore people will forgive him an awful lot. What I will say is there's a lot of schadenfreude going on from people on the right, because, of course, that side of things, the Trudeau side of things, are the ones who propagate cancel culture. They're the ones who say there can be no forgiveness if you say something in the past or do something that is what they perceive as problematic. Then you should have your career destroyed, your reputation destroyed, except when it comes to ours, except when it comes to Trudeau. You see, this is why people on the right are saying this is great, now he should be cancelled too. That's not the right instinct, right? I think what everyone should be able to say, irrespective of political affiliation, is people make mistakes, people make misjudgments. Let's say to him, that was wrong, now we forgive that and we move on. And that's it, because I don't believe that anyone should have their lives ruined on the basis of a mistake they made a long time ago. I don't think that's right.
I was going to talk about Canada as this sort of bastion of political correctness, but actually I'm more interested in another thought that comes to mind, which is boiling this right down to first principles when it comes to blackface. Where do you stand on things like, you know, the Morris dancers who turn it blue? They say, you know, we've been doing this since the 13th century. It goes back to a time when people used to black up because it was a way of begging.
Yeah, it doesn't have the same connotations, actually, historically.
In this country.
It's not the same, exactly. Morris dancing, it's not the same, from my understanding, my limited understanding of Morris dancing. It doesn't have the same kind of history as blackface, which, of course, has the history, you think of the black and white minstrel show in the 50s and the 70s, of the Amos and Andy, which was a kind of radio version of blackface, or Al Jolson, or all that kind of thing. So it has a clearly racist history that does not apply when it comes to Morris dancing. But look, I saw an activist, quite a prominent one, criticising an old photograph of coal miners because they had soot on their face.
You did not?
I did, indeed. This was actually made the headlines. It was last year or 2 years ago now. So, you know, because
I think we need to take a leaf from Nigel Farage's book. Occasionally, you make me want to reach for a stiff drink.
Do I? Well, you should have it on the. You know, I've got a million of these stories, by the way, because I unfortunately am sent all these stories all the time, and I have to read them all. Sometimes they are extremely absurd. But what happens in all of these cases is context isn't considered, and also people just are just not forgiven. There's no possibility of redemption in this movement, and so I think anyone who's criticising Justin Trudeau now should just take a step back and just be a bit, because it has to be one rule for everyone, right?
Totally. And it's the merciless quality that often I find most depressing about that entire movement.
Yes.
We talked last week, or was it the week before, about Peter Boghossian, who you know.
I do.
American professor who says, I've just had it up to here
Yes.
and resigned. There's a sort of parallel with a British music professor from Royal Holloway, part of the University of London, who says, I've had it up to here as well, in particular when I'm told, for instance, that Beethoven and Bach are no longer part of the canon because they were products of imperialism.
Yes, that's right.
Who is this guy, and are his views widely shared?
This is Professor Paul Harper-Scott, who is a musicologist at Royal Holloway, and he's now resigned. It's caused a bit of a stir. He's published his reasons on his blog post. This does have echoes of the Peter Boghossian story from the other week. Peter is a friend of mine, so I'm fully familiar with his situation. There are a lot of parallels here. I'm often contacted by academics who tell me about how bad things are getting.
So give me a quantum. I mean, once a week by what?
No, I wouldn't say once a week. I would say when I'm doing a particular event or something relating to this stuff, or if I'm giving a talk. I've had academics come up to me after a talk I gave saying, this is terrible, we can't talk about it, but this is what's going on at our university. So the problem is you will often have people who have the high status opinions, the fashionable opinions at university saying, there is no problem here. People aren't being cancelled. This is not true. But that's because they've never had their opinions challenged in this way. If you are, for instance, a conservative scholar, you will keep quiet about it. I mean, there have been studies by the Policy Exchange think tank which show that a substantial proportion of conservative scholars will not reveal their views about the world because they fear that they won't get promotion as a result. So there is definitely demonstrably a problem, and that is backed up by the research into this. Now, what Professor Harper-Scott is saying is that we now have a dogma. In fact, I've got his quotation here. He says, in recent years, the dogmatic mode of thinking in which uncritical commitments are enforced by mechanisms involving public humiliation, no platforming, attempts to have scholars fired, has become to seem like it is becoming endemic. That's what he said. Peter Boghossian has said that at his university, Portland State, the students are no longer taught to think. They're taught to mimic the moral certainty of ideologues. That's how he put it in his resignation letter. This is definitely a problem because it's happening across the Atlantic, on both sides. Many scholars are pointing this out, and something does have to be done about it. And however much people just try and wish it away and say this isn't a problem, well, I'm sorry, but Professor Harper-Scott has been at Royal Holloway for 15 years, since 2005.
I'm not entirely sure whether he's having a pop at Royal Holloway or whether he's just I don't think he is necessarily.
Well, he's saying that this is an institution-wide problem.
Yeah.
And it does apply to the university itself. But yes, I don't think he's suggesting that it's limited to this one particular university. What he's saying, he's pointing out the absurdity of activists who will say that musicians from the past, firstly, need to be held by our own standard, but also that curricula needs to be decolonised on the basis of very modern, contemporary concerns. And that, I'm afraid, is incoherent, because if you want to learn about the subject, you have to know about the history of the subject. And often there's a kind of a leap that is made in these activists' minds. I mean, if you take Goldsmiths University a few weeks ago, they were calling for statues to be toppled of Lord Nelson.
Yeah.
And they said, now, Lord Nelson, by the way, was not associated with the slave trade, but they said because he was associated with the Navy, and the Navy was associated with colonialism. So you see this kind of join the dots thing. Therefore, he must be punished. Forget the fact that the Navy spent over 100 years stamping out the transatlantic
with a loss of
slave
30,000 of their lives.
Right, but that doesn't matter, you see. It's a very simplistic, join the dots kind of mentality, unforgiving, let's erase the past, let's revise history. Very, very dangerous, actually.
One thing I find, I'm sure there will be frustration about, is the sense that this feels like an incredibly internalised conversation. So there's the professor in this instance having a go at the universities, and that seems to be the limit of that conversation. I say that in the context of having driven up my daughter to a university where I dropped her off at the weekend. It was a long drive. And, I'm on the hook, as a lot of parents are, for a bit of financial support.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of parents will feel, all right, 18, 19-year-olds, they can go off and make their minds up about things. But it just feels to a lot of parents that they're being put in this sort of groupthink sausage grinder.
Well...
And actually, since we're paying for it, do we get a say in it? Answer comes there, no, of course not.
Well, I would give you some consolation on that score, is that I feel, from my experience of talking to students about this, there's a lot of students who are pushing back against this, and it isn't the case. These are intelligent young adults. They don't go in with a complete blank slate and just take on board. The truth is, however, as Peter has pointed out, that unfortunately, to achieve the marks, to achieve the grades, you have to go along with this ideological worldview. And I spoke to some students last night, actually, who were pushing back against it. And so, we have to trust in young people eventually to try and help turn this around. The problem is that so much of it is coming from the academics, from the people in my generation. In my experience, it's those are the problem. And if they can just get over this, well, what universities need is to reinstate the primacy of being institutions that seek truth. And they've lost that. It's not about the production of knowledge. It's not about truth. It's about what is ideologically expedient. And that's when higher education falls down. And there's a lot of people that I've spoken to who think it's sort of over. I'm not quite as pessimistic as that. But I do think the higher education is in trouble. And I think resignations of this kind, high-profile resignations, may do something to draw attention to it and remedy the situation ultimately.
But these people have to be brave.
They do have to be brave.
His livelihood.
More people have to stand up and speak out.
Nice to talk to him. Nice to talk to him, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Andrew, thanks very much indeed. Andrew Doyle. Now, is Britain about to be faced with a 70s-style energy crisis that could plunge the country